If you enjoy listening to philosophical stories, Zen teachings, and parables, please subscribe to the channel and like the video. We have stories, meditation music, and mantras. The river has always been there, as far back as anyone in our village can remember. Its shimmering waters carve through the valley like a ribbon of liquid silver, weaving life into the landscape and connecting all of us to its flow. The villagers call it the Eternal River, a name that feels fitting for something so steadfast, so constant, and so vital. I grew up with the river as my companion. It was always there, its gentle murmur a backdrop to my childhood. On warm summer days, I would wade into its cool embrace, laughing as the water lapped at my ankles. In the winter, its surface would sometimes freeze over just enough for a daring child to skid across, only to be scolded later by worried parents. The river was our playground, our sustenance, and our guide. It gives us everything: fish to fill our bellies, water to quench our thirst, and a path to neighboring villages when the roads are too treacherous to travel. It waters our crops and cleanses our tools. For us, the river isn't just a feature of the land, it's life itself. And yet, it is more than a provider. To many in the village, the river is sacred, a symbol of time and change, a mirror of life's unrelenting journey. Small shrines dot its banks, humble offerings left by villagers seeking blessings or guidance. A coin for good fortune, a flower for gratitude, a whispered prayer carried downstream. People say the river listens, that it speaks in its own way, though only the wise can hear its voice. No one understands this better than Sojun, the monk who lives on the edge of the village. He spends his days in quiet meditation by the river, his presence as serene and unchanging as the flow of water itself. The villagers hold him in great esteem, claiming he has a connection to the river's wisdom that no one else possesses. I've often seen him there, sitting cross-legged on the rocks, his gaze steady and unwavering. He looks as though he belongs to the river, as though he's part of its endless rhythm. I've never spoken to him directly, though I've heard the stories. They say he can hear the river's voice, that it tells him truths no one else can understand. Lately, I've been thinking about those stories more than ever. My own life feels like it's spiraling out of control, like I'm caught in a current I can't escape. Every day feels heavier than the last, weighed down by the endless responsibilities and worries that pile up like stones in my heart. My family depends on me to help with the farm, but the harvest this year has been poor. The fields, once fertile and green, now seem reluctant to yield their bounty. No matter how hard I work, it feels like the land resists me, mocking my efforts with its stubborn barrenness. On top of that, my younger sister has fallen ill, and the remedies the healer recommends are beyond our means. The weight of it all is suffocating. I feel like I'm drowning, caught in a river of my own making, with no way to find solid ground. I've tried to bear it silently, thinking that showing my struggles would make me appear weak. The villagers expect strength and resilience, and I've always prided myself on meeting those expectations. But lately, I've begun to wonder if there's more to life than just enduring it. As I sit on the edge of the fields, staring out at the river, I feel a strange pull. Its waters glisten under the afternoon sun, the surface rippling gently in the breeze. I can't help but think of Sojun and the stories about his wisdom. Perhaps he knows something I don't, something I need to learn if I'm ever going to find peace. The villagers often say the river reflects who you are, that its surface reveals truths you might not want to face. I don't know what I'll see if I look too closely, but I can't shake the feeling that the answers I seek are somewhere in that flowing current. As the sun dips lower, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, I make my way toward the riverbank. The air is cooler here, carrying the faint scent of wet earth and wildflowers. Sojun is there, sitting cross-legged on his usual rock, his gaze fixed on the water. He doesn't look up as I approach, but somehow I feel as though he knows I'm there. I hesitate, unsure of how to start, but the calmness in his presence gives me courage. Finally, I take a deep breath and step closer. "Excuse me, Sojun," I say, my voice trembling slightly. He turns to me, his expression kind but unreadable. "Yes? I need guidance," I manage to say. I feel lost. I don't know what to do. He nods slowly, as though he's heard these words 100 times before. "Sit with me," he says, gesturing to a spot beside him. I lower myself onto the grass, feeling the cool earth beneath me. Together, we watch the river flow, its waters endless and serene. In the silence, I feel the first flicker of hope, like a small light in the darkness. Perhaps the river does hold the answers. Perhaps, like Sojun, I can learn to hear its voice. I sat down beside Sojun, my legs crossed awkwardly, feeling both exposed and exhausted. He was seated on a worn wooden bench beneath the shade of a great oak tree, the sun filtering through the leaves in soft, golden patterns. I hesitated, unsure of how to begin. The silence between us stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was as though the silence itself was part of the conversation, a space he was holding open for me. Sojun looked at me with quiet patience, his hands resting in his lap, his robes perfectly still. His calmness seemed to wrap around me like a soft blanket. Without a single word, he had already said more than most people ever did. It was an invitation, a reassurance that whatever I said, he would carry without judgment. "I don't even know where to start," I said finally, my voice sounding small in the stillness of the moment. My hands were knotted together in my lap, fingers twisting and turning as if trying to work out the knots in my chest. Everything feels wrong. He tilted his head slightly, an almost imperceptible gesture that encouraged me to continue. That was all it took. The dam broke. "I feel like I'm failing at everything," I blurted out. The words tumbled from my mouth before I could second guess them. "The farm isn't producing. I do everything I'm supposed to. Wake up before dawn, work until my hands are raw. But the fields are barren. I've prayed for rain. I've prayed for answers. I've prayed for anything. But nothing changes." I paused, swallowing hard as the weight of my own words pressed down on me. Sojun didn't interrupt. His silence wasn't indifferent. It was attentive, almost reverent. It felt like I was pouring my problems into a deep well that could never overflow. "It's not just the farm," I continued. "My sister, Kiyomi, She's sick. The healer said there's a remedy, but we can't afford it. Every day, I watch her grow weaker, and I can't do anything about it. I'm supposed to be her protector, but I can't even provide the one thing that might save her. I clenched my hands into fists, my nails digging into my palms. And the village, the people there, they don't say anything outright, but I can feel it. The looks they give me, the whispers when they think I'm not listening. They see me as a failure, and maybe they're right. I've let everyone down, my family, my neighbors, myself. The words came faster now, my voice rising with frustration. I've tried so hard, Sojun. I've tried everything I know how to do. But the harder I try, the worse it gets. It's like the world is against me, like no matter what I do, I'm destined to fail. Tears stung my eyes, but I blinked them away. I refused to cry, not here, not now. And the worst part, I whispered, the worst part is that I can't stop thinking it's my fault. That if I were stronger, smarter, better, things would be different. But I'm not, and they're not, and I don't know what to do anymore. I fell silent, my shoulders slumping under the weight of my confession. Sojun hadn't spoken a single word, but his presence was like a balm to my raw emotions. His calm, steady gaze made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. He nodded slowly, a gesture that said, "I hear you." The silence that followed was heavy, but not oppressive. It felt like a pause, a space where my words could settle and take root. My breathing slowed, and the tension in my chest began to ease, if only slightly. For the first time in what felt like weeks, I didn't feel entirely alone. As I sat there, I started to reflect on everything I'd just said. The frustration, the resistance, the hopelessness, it all stemmed from the same place. I'd been trying so hard to control everything, to force the world to bend to my will, that I hadn't stopped to consider whether that was even possible. The truth was, I couldn't make the crops grow. I couldn't heal my sister. I couldn't change the way the villagers saw me. But admitting that felt like admitting defeat, and I didn't know how to let go without losing myself completely. I glanced at Sojun, hoping for some kind of answer, but he remained silent. Yet his silence wasn't empty. It was full of meaning. It was as if he was telling me that the answers I sought couldn't be given. They had to be discovered within myself. And while that thought scared me, it also gave me a small flicker of hope. Finally, I spoke again, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how to fix this, Sojun. I don't even know where to begin. He met my gaze, his eyes steady and compassionate. And though he still didn't speak, I felt a strange sense of peace begin to stir within me. It was faint, like the first light of dawn breaking through the darkness. But it was there. I sat beside Sojun once more, the weight of my troubles pressing heavily on my shoulders like a storm cloud, refusing to dissipate. The quiet gurgle of the river filled the air, mingling with the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant chirping of birds. It was a peaceful scene, yet I felt anything but at peace. My chest was tight with frustration and weariness, the kind that came from wrestling with life and losing time and time again. Sojun sat beside me, cross-legged, his face serene as always. His calm demeanor was both comforting and maddening, as if he carried some secret I couldn't access. He had asked me here again, to this same spot by the river, and though I didn't understand why, I came. Something about his presence made me feel like there was a way forward, even if I couldn't yet see it. Kenji, Sojun said after a long silence, his voice breaking through my tangled thoughts. Look at the river. I followed his gaze to the flowing water. It twisted and turned as it made its way downstream, glimmering under the sun. Small ripples danced along its surface, and larger currents churned where rocks broke through. "What do you see?" he asked, his tone patient but expectant. "I see a river," I replied, stating the obvious. "And what is it doing?" "It's flowing," I said after a pause, feeling slightly foolish. Sojun smiled faintly, nodding. "Yes, it flows, but watch more closely. Notice how it moves. Look at how it meets the rocks." I studied the water, focusing on the places where it encountered obstacles. The river didn't stop. It didn't hesitate or fight. Instead, it shifted. It slipped around the rocks, over them, through tiny crevices. The current adjusted itself without losing its forward momentum. "It's moving around them," I said, surprised at how simple and effortless it seemed. "Exactly," Sojun said, his voice carrying a note of approval. "The river does not resist the rocks. It does not curse them or see them as enemies. It accepts them as part of its journey and flows with them." I furrowed my brow, unsure what he was trying to tell me. "But I'm not a river," I said, frustration creeping into my voice. "I can't just flow around my problems. They're not like rocks I can avoid. I stopped myself, the words catching in my throat. How could I even begin to explain the weight of everything I was carrying? The family expectations that seemed impossible to meet. The sense of failure that followed me like a shadow. The fear that no matter what I did, it would never be enough. Sojun didn't interrupt. He sat quietly, nodding slightly, as if inviting me to pour out everything I was holding inside. And for some reason, I did. "It feels like everything is against me," I said, the words spilling out in a rush. "No matter how hard I try, there's always something in the way. A setback, a mistake, someone else's expectations. It's like the harder I push, the more everything pushes back. I'm exhausted, Sojun. I don't know how much more I can take." He nodded again, his expression thoughtful. "You are like a man trying to push the river upstream," he said finally. "You fight against the current, believing you can force it to flow the way you want. But the river does not flow that way, Kenji. It has its own path." I frowned, the metaphor hitting too close to home. "So what am I supposed to do? Just let life push me wherever it wants?" "No," Sojun said firmly. "It is not about giving up. It is about learning to flow with life's current, to adapt to its path instead of resisting it. The river meets obstacles just as you do, but it does not resist. It incorporates them into its journey." He gestured toward the water again. "See how the river carves its way around the rocks. Over time, it even shapes them, smoothing their edges. The obstacles do not stop the river. They become part of its flow. And in the process, the river becomes stronger, more defined." I looked at the water again, watching it more closely this time. I saw how it danced over the rocks, how it turned obstacles into opportunities for movement and beauty. It wasn't just flowing, it was thriving. "So you're saying I should stop resisting?" I said slowly, trying to grasp the meaning behind his words. "That I should let life shape me, like the river shapes the rocks?" "Not just let," Sojun said, his gaze steady. "Embrace. Accept the obstacles as part of your path. Learn from them. Let them guide you, not block you. Inner peace does not come from avoiding challenges, Kenji. It comes from integrating them, from finding your way through them with grace." I sat there, his words sinking in. For so long, I had fought against everything. My circumstances, my failures, even myself. I had seen every challenge as a wall to be broken through, and when I couldn't break through, I felt like I was breaking instead. But the river didn't break. It flowed. "Do you think I can do that?" I asked hesitantly. "I know you can," Sojun said with quiet certainty. "But it is not something that happens all at once. It is a practice, a way of seeing and moving through life. Start by observing, by letting go of the need to control everything. Trust the flow, Kenji, and you will find your way." For a long time, I sat there, watching the river. The sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting golden light over the water. Sitting by the river once more, I felt the quiet pull of its steady current, a rhythm that seemed to echo through my thoughts. Sojun sat beside me, his presence calm and grounding. The weight of my earlier struggles lingered in my chest, though lighter now, like a mist that was slowly beginning to lift. "Kenji," Sojun said softly, his voice as gentle as the breeze that stirred the leaves around us. "What do you see when you look at the river?" I followed his gaze to the water. Its surface shimmered in the light, its movement constant and unrelenting. I had watched this river countless times, yet it felt different now. I noticed the way it flowed around the rocks, splitting into streams, only to rejoin again, unbothered by the obstacles in its path. "I see it moving," I said, my voice hesitant. "Flowing forward, no matter what stands in its way." "And how does it respond to those obstacles?" Sojun pressed, leaning forward slightly. I studied the river more closely, watching as the water swirled around a particularly large boulder, creating eddies and ripples before smoothing out again. It didn't fight against the rock, didn't try to force it aside or stop in its tracks. Instead, it adjusted, finding a new way forward. "It doesn't resist," I said, the realization dawning on me. Sojun smiled, his expression filled with quiet approval. "Exactly. The river does not resist. It accepts what is before it and flows with it. It does not see obstacles as enemies, but as part of its journey." His words resonated deeply, stirring something within me that I hadn't recognized before. For years, I had fought against my circumstances, treating every challenge as an opponent to be conquered. I had resisted change, clung to control, and felt defeated when life refused to bend to my will. But what if I didn't have to fight? "What does that mean for me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "It means," Sojun said, his gaze steady, "that you have the power to choose how you respond to life's challenges. Like the river, you can flow with them, adapting and growing rather than exhausting yourself by fighting against them. I sat with his words, letting them sink in. The idea was both liberating and daunting. Could I really let go of my need to control everything? Could I embrace the unknown, the challenges, and the failures without resistance? Sojun seemed to sense my hesitation. The river does not lose its strength by flowing, he said. In fact, it gains power through its journey, carving valleys and shaping landscapes. You too can find strength in your challenges, Kenji, if you allow yourself to flow with them. The simplicity of his wisdom struck me. I had spent so much time fighting against the current of my life, trying to mold it into something it wasn't. But maybe the path to peace wasn't in control. It was in surrender. I turned to Sojun, gratitude swelling in my chest. "Thank you," I said, the words carrying more weight than I could express. He nodded, his smile serene. "The lesson is yours now, Kenji. Carry it with you and let it guide you." As I left the riverbank, a strange sense of lightness filled me. It wasn't that my problems had disappeared. They were still there, waiting for me in the village. But I felt different, as if a new clarity had taken root within me. In the days that followed, I began to see the world through the lens of Sojun's teachings. When my younger brother spilled ink on a cloth I had spent hours weaving, my first instinct was frustration. But then I thought of the river. Instead of letting anger consume me, I showed him how to clean the cloth and salvage what we could. The final product wasn't perfect, but it carried a story, a reminder of the lesson we had shared. When a rival merchant undercut my prices at the market, I felt the familiar sting of defeat. But instead of giving up, I adapted. I introduced a unique design that caught the eye of a traveler passing through. They purchased several pieces, praising their craftsmanship and asking for more in the future. Even my father's harsh criticism, which had once left me feeling small and inadequate, began to feel less like a personal attack. I saw now that his words stemmed from his own struggles and fears. Instead of shutting down, I listened and found moments of connection that had eluded us before. Each challenge became an opportunity to practice the river's wisdom. Slowly but surely, I began to feel a shift within myself. The weight of resistance lifted, replaced by a quiet confidence. I didn't have all the answers, but I didn't need to. I was learning to trust the flow of my life, to see its twists and turns, not as barriers, but as part of the journey. One evening, as the village settled into the quiet hum of twilight, I returned to the river. I didn't come seeking answers or solace this time. I came simply to be, to sit in gratitude for the lessons it had taught me. The water shimmered in the fading light, its surface reflecting the hues of the setting sun. I watched it flow, endlessly moving forward, and felt a deep sense of peace. For the first time in my life, I understood that peace wasn't about the absence of challenges. It was about how I chose to meet them, how I allowed them to shape me. The river had shown me the way, and I would carry its wisdom with me always. As I rose to leave, I whispered a quiet thanks to Sojun, to the river,